Dr. William LaRue Jones is one of the most active and versatile symphonic conductors in America today. His conducting schedule includes appearances at venues all over the world with orchestras such as the Minnesota Orchestra and the Minneapolis Pops, the Penang Symphony in Malaysia, Antofagasta Symphony in Chile, the Symphony Orchestra of Lucerne, Switzerland, the Orquestra Sinfônica do Teatro da Paz in Belém, Brazil. And now, Dr. Jones is the director of the University of Iowa Symphony Orchestra and professor at the University of Iowa. So could you start by telling us pretty much what your job consists of here at the University of Iowa?
Yes, my title actually is Director of Orchestral Studies, which means being in charge of the symphony orchestras as well as then teaching conducting.
And what exactly is the function of a conductor? I know that the conductor tells you to start playing, but then where does it go from there?
Actually, the conductor is the one that unifies all the different concepts into one whole. Every player in the orchestra probably has an idea of how their part should go. And so the conductor has to then cradle all that information and energy into one interpretation, which is the conductor's interpretation.
Of course. And I know that your right hand is to beat the time, basically. What does your left hand do?
Well, actually, the right hand should tell us four things: tempo, style, articulation, and dynamics.
So explain those to a layman.
Well, all the tempo has to do with how fast or slow you play. The style is whether it's a Baroque style, classical style, romantic style, which relates to articulation, because style and articulation are very much related. And the other has to do with the dynamics, whether something should be very strong or very quiet and soft. So all of that should be able to be shown with the right hand. The left hand helps with cueing, who's supposed to come in, shaping of phrases, reminder of dynamics. So it really has a different role than the right hand.
Okay, so how would you use your right hand to indicate louder here, softer there?
It's within the strength of the gesture.
Okay.
And then if you want something to be loud, then the strength of the gesture demonstrates that. If you want it to be soft, then it's a different kind of...
Of course, you will have gone over this with the musicians in rehearsal and so forth,
absolutely,
correct?
yes, right. But they should be able to read it pretty much the first time through of what your gestures are saying. Those that have been playing in orchestras for a while. I mean, someone is brand new, they have no idea what
But somebody doing at the university level usually is a skilled sight reader and can just start from scratch and,
right.
And
what they do is they play their interpretation. They may not be the same as their stand partner, for instance, and what you have to do is work on the articulation, that it's the same, work on the dynamics, the whole concept that everybody's thinking the same way.
And what goes into teaching conducting? If I come in there as a freshman music major, prospective music major, saying, I want to be the next great conductor, how would you start with me?
Well, basically you start out with the physical setup. How you stand, how you move your arms, and then teaching them the different patterns. When I say patterns, whether you're conducting in 4/4 or 3/4 or 6/8 or which way do you move through space. And everything that you do as a conductor has to do with whether you're moving through space in acceleration or deceleration or constant speed. There's only 3 that you can do. And so part of your teaching is having them gain the flexibility and dexterity of how they move through space.
All right. Now, have you been a musician all your life, or did you come to it a little later?
Well, I didn't start out until I got in college. Through high school, I was just playing athletics and didn't play music. When I got to college, I went to college on a baseball scholarship, but baseball and majoring in engineering.
Okay.
But baseball and engineering didn't match up as far as afternoon workouts and engineering labs. And so during my freshman year, I started looking for something that would be compatible still to be able to play baseball.
But you must have played an instrument before that, right?
Well, I'd never had any private lessons. I had an old clarinet. In fact, it was a metal clarinet, an old Army metal clarinet. And I had a book, so I learned how to play a little bit on the clarinet, but not that would have ever gotten me into a school.
And where did you go to college?
Kansas State,
Kansas State.
in Manhattan, Kansas.
Okay, sure. I know
Yes.
that place.
And so during my freshman year, I started talking to actually he was one of the English professors, but one of his good friends was the band director. And he said, you should go talk to the band director, and because he knew I was not interested in staying in engineering. And so I did, and they decided, well, what I should probably do is learn to play the bassoon.
Okay. Now, the bassoon is known as the clown of instruments. Why is that?
Well, I like to think of it more as the prince of instruments. But the composers have usually used it as kind of the comical roles. The Sorcerer's Apprentice, or even with Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, is the one that starts out with the really high struggling sound,
Right.
kind of representing the plants trying to break through the earth and is struggling to come alive. And so that is also, when Stravinsky wrote it, supposed to be kind of comical. Nowadays, people play it like a...
Although at the time it wasn't taken as comical, it was taken as an occasion for a brawl, just very nearly.
Yes, it was infuriating, actually.
And how did you come to decide on conducting?
Well, through playing. After I went through school, I got my bachelor's degree and then a master's degree following that, because I felt I was really behind when I started. So I continued on through with the master's, which then put me in a position to audition for Juilliard in New York. So I went from Manhattan, Kansas to Manhattan, New York.
And was this still as a bassoonist? Or
as a bassoonist.
Okay.
And so then I started playing while I was in New York, as a student at Juilliard. I'd do some jobbing and things. And then went from there to actually doing more professional playing. When I left New York, then I left New York to start doing my doctorate, and continued to play. I was playing in the Madison Symphony. I did my doctorate at University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay, that's where my dad got his doctorate also.
Oh, really? Yes, wonderful town, a wonderful school. And I was playing in the Madison Symphony, and then when I finished my doctorate, I got the call from Minnesota. And so I went to Minnesota I started studying conducting for my doctorate, I should say. But my degree was still in bassoon performance and conducting. And so I got the call to come in for an audition in Minnesota, and the audition was for conducting, but also at the same time to play in Minnesota Orchestra.
Okay.
So I kind of...
Would this have been under Skrovichevsky?
Under Skrovichevsky, indeed.
How was he to work with?
Wonderful. He was he is still, 'cause I think he's 93 now. He's a brilliant man. He was a real gentleman. Never angry or the kind of tyrant that'd be throwing things at you or cussing you out or something. He was a real gentleman, I thought. He was there 19 seasons, I think.
He was indeed.
And so I was there with him for, well, about 15 of those before he left.
And so were you a conductor under him for a while?
I did sort of the guest conducting. I wasn't a titled conductor, but I would do the run-out concerts and some of the what they'd call the Thursday morning
Right.
blue-haired ladies
Sure.
kind of concerts, and occasionally some of the youth concerts they would bring in for things. So I did a good lot of conducting that neither he nor the associate conductor were responsible for doing. They would take the time off. And I did a couple of the concerts that were replacement concerts when someone was ill. Then you didn't get a rehearsal, you just go in and conduct the concert.
That must be a bit of a challenge.
Yes, that's the biggest challenge, I think, is just when you have no chance for them to get to know what you're going to do and you don't know what they're going to do, but all worked.
And what are some of your very favorite pieces to conduct?
Well, the ones that I find a real challenge, conducting Mahler, Richard Strauss, Stravinsky. I love them because they're technical challenges. But then just to conduct Beethoven and conduct Brahms, and I mean they're.
If you had to choose just one piece that you could really have fun with, what do you think it would be just off the top of your head?
Oh my. Just about any one of them once you get involved in it. I think one of the tone poems of Strauss.
Okay, I've been told that Ein Heldenleben is perhaps the most difficult orchestral piece to put together.
Yes, all of his tone poems, well, not all of them, but Ein Heldenleben and Don Juan and Thus Spake Zarathustra, they're very difficult for individual instruments.
That's what I've been told.
Yeah.
So if you are commissioned to conduct, let's say, Also sprach Zarathustra, what's your process? What do you do once you've put the phone down, having accepted the assignment?
Well, you study the score like crazy, because what you have to do is develop a plan of how you're going to organize a rehearsal, how much time you're going to spend. Well, first of all, you'll know how much time you have. They'll tell you you have 3 rehearsals or you have whatever. And so then you take the amount of time of that particular work, look through the different difficulties of the sections, and decide what you think will take the most time to really accomplish musically, to really organize and unify. And so it's a matter of studying the score and then making a rehearsal plan, and then trying to follow that plan through the rehearsals going into the concert.
And is there a big difference between conducting a purely orchestral piece, such as one of Strauss's tone poems, and conducting a concerto where you've got to match the orchestra with a solo performer?
Yes, I think that's the answer right there. When you're doing just an orchestral work, you're the one that makes all of the tempo decisions, all the phrasing, when to stretch, when to move ahead in the music. And you're working with a soloist. Basically, you want them to be successful. So you find out what their interpretation is, where they want to go faster, where they want to slow down, how they want to shape a certain phrase, and then you try to match your interpretation with their interpretation, and then to come out with a unified product. That's always harder because sometimes you don't agree with their interpretation.
How do you work things out in a case like that?
You usually sit down ahead of time and just in a studio, and you say, play for me, and they play, and then you discuss the tempos where they're slowing down, and then you say that won't work for the orchestra because the oboe has to do blah blah.
Aha.
And so then they have to modify what they might have thought would be wonderful when they're just playing by themselves, but it doesn't work then when it comes to other players in the orchestra. So then you say, all right, then we'll do this, or they say, I want to stretch here. You say, no problem, because it won't get in the way of the orchestra. And again, you want to make sure that the soloist is successful, because they're the ones that they're on the hot seat.
Yeah.
And you don't want to do anything that's going to unnerve them or make them necessarily second guess themselves. So you want to do it early enough, talk to the soloist, so they can get that in their fingers or in their mindset.
Okay. And do you have any favorite conductors that you sort of pattern yourself after historically?
Well, not physically, but musically, yes. Actually, my favorite musical conductor is Carlos Kleiber.
All right, and I'm not familiar with him. Who is he?
Well, Carlos Kleiber, he was actually the son of another conductor, Eric Kleiber. And during the wartime, Eric Kleiber left Germany and went to Cuba. Therefore, Carlos Kleiber being his name rather than a Germanic name. So Carlos grew up in a musical family. And his father was quite famous, actually. When the war ended, he went back and did a lot of conducting, mainly in East. Carlos never really went back. He lived in Cuba, then he went to Italy and to France, and mainly just lived in Europe. But he's one of those conductors that if he were to conduct a Beethoven symphony, he would demand 13 rehearsals with a Vienna Philharmonic or Berlin Philharmonic that have played those pieces 100 times, because what he wanted to do was get them away from the interpretation they had been doing and then add on his interpretation. Now, there's not a lot of difference, but the subtleties are the things that really makes the difference in one person's interpretation than the other.
Now, if I'm listening to a recording of one conductor as opposed to another, what should I be listening for? For example, if I am listening first to a recording of Leonard Bernstein conducting Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, and then I listen to Herbert von Karajan conducting the same piece, what should I be listening to? What differences should I be looking for?
Well, one thing, Bernstein would be a lot faster than von Karajan,
right?
Who liked to just sort of milk the phrases and the rhythms, and Bernstein was always about excitement. Not all about excitement. He also was.
But von Karajan was notoriously slow.
Oh, notoriously slow, but von Karajan really only worked with Berlin Philharmonic. He did a little guest conducting, but that was his vehicle, so he could do whatever he wanted to. Bernstein did mostly guest conducting, with the exception of the New York Philharmonic time. He was sort of the gadfly running around conducting Vienna or Berlin or Chicago or wherever he was going, and so he would put things together very quickly, and he was then wanted everybody to be excited, the players to be excited, the audience to be excited. Von Karajan wanted to create different kinds of atmospheres. So you could tell right away that that's the Berlin Philharmonic if you go to the old recordings, or that this is Vienna.
So you can tell Berlin because, for one thing, it tends to be slower than the others.
And a certain sound. The sound in America, the sound of the old Boston Symphony under Pierre Monteux compared to the Chicago Symphony under Reiner, or Cleveland under Zell, you could put on a recording and tell which orchestra was which. Now, a lot of it had to do with the woodwind sound or brass sound, Chicago brass, woodwinds in Boston, string sound in Philadelphia.
Did that have to do with the acoustics of the venue in which they were recording?
To a certain extent, but mainly those particular conductors had a different concept of sound, of balance. So which one of those different families of instruments did they think should be the most prominent?
Right.
And Chicago has always had the reputation of this big, strong brass sound.
And on the other hand, Sir Thomas Beecham famously said, "Never look at the brass, it only encourages them."
That's right. And he's correct.
Are there any modern conductors currently working that you especially admire?
Muti, certainly. Abbado, Claudio Abbado, they're fantastic. And I think young Dudamel is going to be somebody that we will certainly know for a long time. Sort of replacing the Simon Rattle.
Right. There seems to be general agreement that Dudamel really has it.
Yeah, he has it. He's not a flash in the pan, because he's kind of flamboyant, but
he's supposed to be.
But he's supposed to be. That's right. But he's flamboyant, with a real strong musical base.
Well, I have to say I'm relieved to hear you say that you like Dudamel, because I was afraid that maybe I was showing my seeds by being an admirer of his.
Yes, no.
Well, that's great. Now, how can you tell when one of your students really has it as a conductor?
First of all, it's their ear. Whether they hear wrong notes, incorrect rhythms, and then developing a process on how to address it. When do you stop? When don't you stop? When you just assume that person knows they made a mistake, they'll correct it themselves, or do they not know, and then you stop? But if they don't hear, then it doesn't matter what they can do physically. But if they have very good ears, then what you work on is their physical dexterity, and then their gestures. Bernstein talked about a conductor's gestures by saying it's like traveling to a foreign country. Now, if you only know a few words in that language, you don't communicate very well. So the better you know the language, the better you can communicate. So the more flexibility and the better you can move your arms in a gestural way for all kinds of musical events and happening, the better you communicate.
Right. What I remember always about Bernstein was not his gestures, but I was exposed to him first in the early 1960s, and I just remember that hair flopping around.
Oh, yes. Well, that's kind of like a Dudamel or something.
Yeah, very much
yes,
so.
Right. As a young conductor, you know, he was Hollywood. I mean, he was a very handsome man and had all the charisma that one could ever think about, and his ability to go on those TV shows, that his young persons concerts.
That's right. That's how I was exposed to him in 1962, 63, whenever.
And he could talk to you about the music in a way that you thought, oh, but you didn't know that. But it made you feel like you were going right along with him and you understood. And he was different in rehearsals than he was for the concerts. In rehearsals, he was very much a taskmaster.
That's right. I remember reading George Plimpton's account of his brief stint under Bernstein.
Right. But then when he was in the concert, he was actually helping entertain the audience.
Of course. Now, what goes into managing an orchestra when you're not actually on the stage doing a performance?
Well, a lot of it has to do with planning again. You plan the season. You work with, say, a professional orchestra. You work with the librarian to procure all the music that you're doing for the season. You work with the publicity and marketing department. You have to work with the fundraising department. The music director, as that particular entity, then has all of that to do, plus doing all the auditioning to replace players or to bring in soloists, guest conductors. So you have to actually put together the entire season. And a university would do actually the same thing, but what you're doing is also teaching someone how to be a librarian.
I imagine that the orchestra itself can get terribly competitive, can't it?
Oh, yes.
I mean, these young fellows are fighting for a very small number of jobs, and they want the solo time, they want the first chair position, and so forth.
And you have to manage that. It would be just like the football team where everyone wants to be the starting quarterback. Well, they can't be. Well, everybody can't be the soloist. And that's where you have to be diplomatic to a certain extent and stand your ground and be firm on others. You know, everybody can't sit in the same chair. And there are those that would like to just be sitting right in the concertmaster chair or principal player chair all the time. And in the university setting, I rotate them. So
Right.
they don't have a say. Yes. So I rotate them around, then everybody gets a little piece of the action, and no one goes through 4 years of their career sitting in the back of the section kind of thing.
That's great. Now, do you sometimes experience some really difficult follow-ups in the middle of a performance, God forbid, or a rehearsal, and how do you deal with it? Do you have any great war stories about that?
Well, what I say to my conductors, if something goes wrong within the orchestra, don't stop. It's the conductor's responsibility to find a way to unify the section. If someone has a big solo and they don't come in and the orchestra sort of is wondering what's going on, you have to be able to keep it going. So you don't stop. That's the first thing. Because otherwise, if you stop, there's always people in the audience that at that moment they're thinking about grocery shopping or whatever else. No one is going to concentrate for 40 minutes on every note and every measure. And sometimes the players don't either, so they don't come in. So you have to be able to make it survivable. Now, one of the things that happened, talking about something that went wrong, Sarah Caldwell, who was she founded the Boston Opera Company.
That's right.
And several years ago, they had sort of the Year of the Women Conductors. And Sarah Caldwell was going around, and so was Marin Alsop and various conductors. Well, Sarah Caldwell came in to Minnesota, and instead of doing opera things, she decided she wanted to do an all-Stravinsky concert.
Oh my gosh.
So she was doing Firebird and got lost in the middle of it. And so the orchestra just had to keep playing. They had to start just listening to each other and keep going because she was just completely lost.
Well, that reminds me of the old joke about difference between playing with a conductor and without one. It's safer with a conductor, but it's like having sex without a condom. It's safer without a conductor, safer with a conductor, but so much more beautiful without.
Right. Right.
Anyway.
Well, at the end of it, she knew that the orchestra had saved her. So at the end of the whole thing, she bought champagne for the orchestra and had it sitting up in the room. She didn't try to blame the orchestra for the mistake. She owned up to it, which was great, because everybody knew, or she knew, and she knew the orchestra knew that she didn't quite make it.
But I don't think I've ever noticed you having a crisis of that sort in any of your...
No, not yet. Right. Hope not.
Well, now tell us about your immediately upcoming concert in, I believe it's about the 20th of March, is it?
That's right. We're doing the 30th of March.
30th of March.
30th of March. We're doing an all Beethoven concert, overture to Prometheus, which was this wonderful big ballet only ballet that Beethoven wrote. Then we're doing his Symphony Number 8.
Okay, that's my very favorite. Most people love either his 5th or his 9th, but right. I love his 8th.
Oh, I think it's a terrific work. And then Ksenia Nosakova is playing the 5th piano concerto, the Emperor Concerto.
The Emperor Concerto, that's the one that everybody recognizes.
Yes, and every pianist, it's one of their bucket lists.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. So, yeah, it's going to be one heck of a concert, and I'm looking forward to taking my usual place in the front row.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to go out, but I am really looking forward to that and other concerts. Thank you very much, Professor William LaRue Jones, for being on the show, and thank you all.
Thank you.